Hello class, welcome to the second installment of the guided notes session. Today we're going to talk about what COVID-19 is and what it's not, specifically the virology of the pathogen. I hope you already downloaded the worksheet. You should be following along and filling in the blanks. I'm not going to do it this time because I noticed the annoying clicking sound from me constantly typing, so instead I'm just going to highlight the blanks like this that you should be filling in. So virology is the study of viruses, yeah, you got it. Now, these are inherently interesting. Some scientists think that they're the pinnacle of evolution, the top of every food chain, with no natural predators that preys on everything. And some scientists think, oh, well, they're not even alive because outside of a host cell, they don't even possess most of the characteristics of life. They're just little particles of dust. Well, I'm sure that after this global pandemic, we're all going to be even more interested in the field of virology. Now, you've probably heard COVID called coronavirus, and oh, is that right? Is there a correct name? Well, they're both correct. One of them is more precise. Coronavirus comes from the Spanish word corona, which means crown. Because if you look at them under a microscope and just look at the outside, it looks like they're surrounded by a crown because of these spike proteins. And coronavirus isn't one species or organism, it's actually a family of viruses. Remember taxonomy? Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And it has 9 different genera, plural of genus, and many different species. And they affect a whole bunch of different animals, not just humans. You may have even had one before. The common cold is not actually one disease. It can be caused by 4 different genera or small subgroups of viruses, and one of those is coronavirus, which has 4 different species that can cause just the common cold. Most of them are upper respiratory infections, but in some animals like cows and pigs, they're actually GI or gastrointestinal or stomach bugs that cause diarrhea and disease. So they're mostly about the lungs, but they have many different symptoms that are possible, which we're seeing in a bunch of different people too. Now, how would you know if your common cold was from coronavirus or something else? Well, they have a fever associated with them. Not usually the case with other things like these rhinoviruses or any of these guys over here. Influenza and coronavirus are the only things that will cause a fever with the cold. Now, we've always treated them the same. This is probably the first you're even hearing of any of these things, and scientists still don't even know what a quarter of the things that cause the cold are. So we as a society and the medical profession has always treated colds as if they were one thing. Because there's nothing they can really do. There's no cure for the common cold. And then also, they're usually not that serious. So that may be about to change. So some of them we've already known were serious and have been kind of our red flags that we should have been more prepared than we are for this. Scientists have been worried about them for a long time. Bill Gates even made a TED Talk back in 2015 about how SARS was going to be the next pandemic. And that's what, this is. So first sign was MERS, M-E-R-S. It was quite deadly. 35% of people contracted it, but that also meant that it was small because it, mostly, so 35% of people that contracted died. But that also helped it contain itself because it killed a lot of its hosts before they could spread it. SARS was the next one. It spread a little bit more because it was less fatal, but still had a 10% fatality rate and was pretty severe for people that had it. Now, technically, this current outbreak caused by COVID is a SARS outbreak. COVID is a variation of SARS. Now, what is it not? It's not the flu. I'm not going to explain all that. There's this great video I found that you should watch right now that explains why it's not. Now, people make that comparison a lot because it's what we understand, and some of the symptoms are similar, but in all honesty, it's a dangerous comparison to make because it makes us take the issue a lot less serious than it actually is. I'm not going to say more. Watch the video. Did you watch the video? Okay. So this is the actual coronavirus structure itself. It's pretty simple, as most viruses are. Its main components are these antigens on the outside, which you're already familiar with. But what are those? Well, you got the spike protein, which is the main antigen that allows the virus to bind to the ACE2 receptor. It's like the wedge that gets its foot in the door of this, normally benign receptor that just regulates metabolism. But then this other part, the hemagglutinin esterase, then sort of forces the door open, or rather dissolves the door, because it helps it allows the virus to enter the cell by sort of merging with the cell membrane and dumping the contents inside. Now, what contents are we talking about? We're talking about the RNA. The RNA of a virus is its genetic material, and viruses are the only things, not all of them, but some of them use RNA as their genetic material. Most other living things use DNA. Write that down right there, and then it has a simple lipid envelope with a nucleocapsid to sort of protect that RNA from damage from the environment, which it does mediocre. So that's what it is and what it's not. But where did it come from? So COVID-19 evolved from an animal virus, which is what's called being zoonotic. So it's a zoonotic pathogen that we think evolved from bat coronavirus to be able to infect humans. How do we know that? Well, we sequenced its genome within the first 2 weeks of it being around and found that its genetic material and antigens were most similar to coronaviruses commonly found in bats. Now, you may have heard a conspiracy theory going around for a while that it was a bioweapon engineered by China, or even the United States. There was a counter rumor probably generated by China after we generated the rumor about them. But since the bat and human strains are not actually that similar, they were like, how did it make this jump, right? It's not A to B, it's A to C. Where's B? But one of the things that they found as well was that this spike protein is similar to that found on HIV, which has actually been shown to not really be a big deal, because a lot of different viruses that have nothing to do with being engineered in a lab have this same protein. It's a very common thing with evolution, is that if something works, it will show up in different species. Like, you do the same cellular respiration that all other animals do, because not because they were engineered that way by humans, but because it works. And so evolution conserves that mechanism. Now, how did it get the extra base pairs then? That's the part of the mystery that we still don't really understand. But a prime suspect is the pangolin, which I'll honestly say I'd never really heard of much before all of this. But coronavirus in pangolins has the missing parts that bridge the gap between bats and the human strain of COVID. So we think that it could have been a recombinant DNA from DNA of this species of coronavirus, and this species of coronavirus sort of making coronavirus babies. But I'm a scientist, so I'm going to say that we don't exactly know. And that's what science is all about, is that you don't assume things until you have proof. You have ideas, you have hypotheses, right? And the way that a lot of pseudoscience works is that it stops right there. It's like, this is a good idea, therefore it must be true. But real scientists have to actually have evidence before they draw conclusions, even if it's a good idea. So even if you would like it to be true. We may never know the exact origin story, but there are some things that we can say about the future of COVID. And one of those things that I said earlier that is really important is that it's an RNA virus, and that now that probably doesn't mean much to you. But one thing you should know about that is that all of these types of viruses evolve very quickly. This is because this is for the same reason that most living things don't use RNA. It mutates very quickly. RNA polymerases, the things that copy it, are very fast and sloppy. And in an organism like you, that would cause mutations that would kill you. But in an organism like the virus, who has numbers on its side, right? Like when it reproduces, it does so in the billions. So if 99.9% of them die, and then 99.9% of the ones that survive, either it's not good or it, is harmless, and only 0.00001% have a beneficial mutation, that's still thousands of viruses. So it works for them to mutate really quickly because that actually helps them to evolve. Now, this has actually already led to multiple strains of COVID-19 being out there in the world. Right now, they're all fundamentally the same, though. A lot of people get caught up in the different strains. The only thing that's really useful for is knowing, like where exactly it came from and tracking it. All those people that think that it came from China, actually, they found that it came from Europe. Because it's most similar to the strains that are there. So, the ones that we have on the East Coast, that is. California, different story. Now, one thing you should know about these strains that right now they're all the same. They have the same symptoms, same infection rate, same mortality rate. And that's because COVID's doing so well. If it ain't broke, you don't fix it. So it's under no pressure from natural selection to adapt or change. But this has some implications, and I want you to think about the implications in these questions. So once we start implementing treatments, you'll see in the next assignment, maybe it's not the next assignment, later assignment, there are a bunch of different treatments in the works. We already talked about how they're planning to come out with a vaccine in record time. But once that happens, isn't that going to add natural selective pressure back into the equation? And what could happen at that time, given that it's an RNA virus that mutates very quickly? I said I wasn't going to give you the answer, but I led you right there. What could happen? So another implication of this that I found really interesting, and that I already mentioned, is that we have always treated all colds and flus as the same. And why do you think that COVID might start changing that? Why do you think people might start actually caring, what type of cold you have or where your flu came from? The last question. Do you remember in ecology class where we learned about, different living things possessing energy, right? Like we all need to eat other living things to survive. And we're all passing around energy that was ultimately from the sun. Well, even if you didn't take that class, it should be apparent to you that humans occupy a lot of energy. There are 7 billion of us and growing. We're at the top of almost every food chain, so the energy that we get had to get filtered through a bunch of different things. So we possess a lot of the energy, certainly a lot more than bats. So this as forcing us into new environments where we're being exposed to these pathogens that we might not have been exposed to before if we weren't delving into the jungle. But we're looking pretty good to them. Why are we such an attractive target for these zoonotic viruses capable of jumping to infect humans? Given that it could, why would it be a good idea, evolutionarily speaking, for them to do so? Again, if you think of us as food, virus food, why are we looking like a buffet? So I'll let you answer those questions and submit them with your assignment. Feel free to pause, go back, look at anything that you might have missed, or to email me about any questions, and I'll try and help you as best I can. I hope you found this as interesting as I do. Signing off.